Control used to feel like oxygen to me. Not the kind people talked about in interviews or leadership books, but the quiet, invisible kind that kept the world from surprising me. I controlled calendars, contracts, outcomes. I control how long meetings lasted, how silence filled a room, how people lowered their voices when I walked past. The company moved the way I moved, precisely, cleanly, without wasted emotion. That control built Wexler-Cade Technologies into something Manhattan respected and feared. It also built a private life that felt like a hallway after midnight, long, empty, and perfectly lit. No noise, no mess, no one close enough to ask what it cost. And then there was Mara Quinn, my executive secretary, positioned just outside my office like a constant I never bothered to solve. 4 years of her sitting at that desk, balancing my impossible schedule like it was nothing, filtering chaos before it touched me. She never announced her competence. She just lived inside it. Calm, accurate, quietly relentless. I told myself she was a system, a component, a professional asset. That lie worked until it didn't. It started with small things. The kind of things I would normally never allow into my awareness. The way Mara didn't flinch when grown men in $1,000 suits tried to intimidate her. The way she spoke to the maintenance crew with the same respect she gave the board. The way she remembered details about people I didn't even remember meeting, names of spouses, sick kids, anniversaries, like she decided human beings mattered even inside a building designed to treat them like numbers. One afternoon, I stepped out of my office and saw her alone at her desk, typing with steady hands while the floor around her was loud with corporate urgency. Someone had left a coffee cup too close to the edge of her keyboard, and she slid it away without looking, as if she'd anticipated the accident before it existed. That bothered me. Not because the cup was a risk, but because she moved like she could predict disorder. Like she could predict me. "You're still here," I said, meaning it as a statement, not a question. She looked up, and her expression didn't change, no flattery, no fear, no performance. Just presence. "Your last call ended 10 minutes late. I adjusted tomorrow's first meeting, so you won't walk in rushed." My staff always tried to impress me. Mara didn't try. She simply ensured I didn't collapse under the weight of my own demands. "Fine," I said, and walked back into my office like I hadn't just felt something tighten in my chest. It got worse after that. I began noticing how often I looked for her without intending to. I would leave my office for a document and find myself pausing, watching her work as if my mind needed proof that she was still there, that she hadn't vanished, that the steady rhythm she created hadn't been imagined. I hated that. The problem with feelings is that they don't ask permission. They don't file a request with legal. They don't wait until after earnings calls. I tried to fix it the way I fix everything, by tightening the system. Shorter interactions. Less eye contact, more distance. I kept my tone colder than usual, as if coldness could cauterize whatever had started bleeding inside me. But distance didn't erase her. It only made her absence louder. Then the board dinner happened. The private dining room on the 52nd floor of the Holloway Tower was designed to make men feel like kings, darkwood, low lighting, city views like a private kingdom. I was halfway through a conversation about expansion into Europe when I noticed Mara standing near the entrance, holding a folder she'd brought at my request. A board member, Carter Hale, old money, old arrogance, leaned toward another director and didn't lower his voice enough. "You ever notice how these assistants are always strategically chosen?" he murmured, eyes flicking toward Mara like she was a decoration. "The company's image, the optics, makes investors comfortable." The other man chuckled like it was nothing. I felt heat rise behind my ribs, sharp and immediate, like someone had insulted something I owned. And then I hated myself for that too, because Mara wasn't mine. She wasn't property, and my anger shouldn't have been possessive. It should have been moral. Human. Mara didn't react. She had clearly heard it. Her posture stayed composed, her face unreadable. But I saw it, just for a second, in the way her fingers tightened around the folder's edge. A micro flinch she didn't allow to become visible. I walked over and took the folder from her hands. "Thank you," I said, my voice controlled, but my eyes locked on Carter. "That will be all." Mara didn't leave right away. She hesitated, as if measuring whether I was dismissing her or protecting her. Then she nodded and stepped out. As soon as the door closed, Carter smiled like he'd won something. "You run a tight ship, Grant." I held my expression steady. "We don't discuss my staff like they're marketing props." Carter lifted both hands in mock surrender. "Relax. It's business reality. Business reality." That phrase had been my religion for years. And suddenly it tasted like rot. The dinner ended, and I returned to my office long after midnight. The executive floor was silent. Mara's desk lamp was off, her chair pushed in, everything aligned as if she'd raised herself from the space before leaving. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the emptiness she left behind, realizing something I had been avoiding for months. I didn't just respect her. I relied on her. And the board, men like Carter, had already started noticing. My phone buzzed with a message from Aria forwarded complaint. Anonymous. Short. Poisonous. It accused Mara of leveraging proximity for influence. It hinted at favoritism. It used words that sounded neutral but carried something darker underneath. Something about her not fitting the brand, about certain backgrounds, being risky optics. I read it twice, then a third time, my jaw tight enough to crack a tooth. They weren't just watching her. They were setting her up. In that moment, the truth hit me with a clarity I didn't want. If I stayed close to her, they would turn her into a story they could control. And if I fought them openly, they'd still find a way to make her pay. I went back into my office and opened the global expansion file, the one marked Barcelona launch. My cursor hovered over the staffing plan. Promotion. Overseas placement. A clean narrative. A distance I could justify as strategy. My hand didn't shake, but it felt like it should have. Because I knew what I was really doing. I wasn't protecting my control anymore. I was trying to protect her. From them. From me. From whatever this was becoming inside my chest. And as I typed her name into the transfer authorization, a cold realization settled over me like a verdict. The moment I sent Mara Quinn overseas, there would be no pretending this was only business. I hit save, staring at the transfer order with her name on it. Then my office door opened, and Mara stepped inside, holding a resignation letter I had never expected to see. Mara Quinn stood in my office doorway with a single sheet of paper in her hand, and for the first time in years the room I controlled so precisely felt unstable. The resignation letter looked small in her fingers, but it carried a kind of weight that didn't belong to paper. I hadn't expected this move from her. Mara was many things, careful, thoughtful, impossibly composed, but impulsive wasn't one of them. "Is there a problem with the schedule for tomorrow?" I asked, forcing my voice into the calm, measured tone that had built my reputation. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. That alone told me this wasn't about scheduling. "I thought you should have this before the rumors reached you," she said quietly, placing the letter on my desk. Rumors. That word sat between us like a loaded weapon. I glanced down at the letter but didn't touch it. Explain. Mara inhaled slowly, as if preparing for something unpleasant. "Someone filed a complaint with HR," she said. "Anonymous. Apparently my proximity to executive leadership is raising concerns." The phrasing was almost identical to the message I had read an hour earlier. For a moment neither of us spoke. Mara's voice remained steady, but something deeper lived under it, something tired. "They didn't say it directly," she continued, "but the implication is clear. They think I'm benefiting from being visible." Visible. The corporate version of the word was clean, polite, but we both understood what it meant. In rooms filled with old money and older prejudices, Mara Quinn didn't look like the assistants those men expected. Her heritage, her quiet confidence, the way she never tried to shrink herself to make them comfortable, it all made her an easy target. I leaned back slowly in my chair. "Who told you about the complaint?" "HR asked me questions this afternoon," she replied. "They framed it as routine, but I've worked in this building long enough to recognize when people are looking for confirmation instead of truth. Her eyes met mine then, steady and searching. "I won't be the reason your company becomes a gossip column," she said. So I decided to solve the problem before it grows." She nudged the resignation letter slightly closer to me. The move irritated me more than it should have. "You're resigning because someone filed a cowardly complaint?" I asked. "It's not just the complaint." That answer caught my attention. Mara hesitated for a fraction of a second, then spoke again. "There are people on your board who already believe I don't belong here," she said. And if they decide to prove it, they will." Her tone remained controlled, but the reality behind her words was brutal. Racism in corporate America rarely arrived screaming. It arrived quietly, hidden inside policies, whispers, and anonymous reports. I knew exactly which board members she meant. Carter Hale's face flashed through my mind. My fingers tapped once against the desk. "You're not resigning," I said finally. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "That doesn't sound like my decision to make." "It isn't." She studied me carefully, trying to read something beneath my expression. "What are you planning?" she asked. For a second, I considered telling her the truth, that the company was opening a new international office in Barcelona, and that I had already typed her name into the transfer authorization minutes before she walked in. But admitting would reveal something I wasn't ready to expose. Instead, I slid a folder across the desk toward her. "The Barcelona Expansion Initiative." Mara opened it slowly, her eyes scanned the documents: international staffing plans, leadership structure, relocation benefits. Halfway through the file, she stopped. At the top of the page was the position title: Director of International Operations, Barcelona Office, and directly beneath it, Candidate Recommendation. Mara Quincy looked up at me, confusion flickering across her face. "This is a promotion." "Yes." "A relocation to Spain." "Yes." Her expression between disbelief and suspicion. "You're offering me a director position right after someone accused me of manipulating my position." I held her gaze evenly. "I'm offering it because you've been doing the job already," I said. "You've run this office more efficiently than half the executives upstairs." "That's not an explanation." "It's the only one that matters." Mara closed the folder but didn't move. "You're sending me away," she said quietly. The words landed harder than they should have. "No," I replied. "I'm expanding the company. You're the most qualified person to build the international branch." She watched me for several long seconds, the silence stretching until the air in the room felt heavier. "Barcelona is permanent," she said. "For now. And you'll stay in New York." "Yes." Something unreadable passed through her eyes then, something like disappointment mixed with understanding. "You're solving the rumor problem," she murmured. "That's part of it." Mara leaned back slightly in the chair across from my desk. "You know what the board will say about this?" she said. "They'll say you moved me to hide the scandal. They can say whatever they want." Her gaze sharpened. "And what do you say?" I didn't answer immediately, because the real answer, that I was trying to put an ocean between myself and the woman who had somehow become the unpredictable element in my life, that was something I refused to say out loud. Finally, I spoke. "I say the Barcelona office needs a leader." Another long silence followed. Then Mara stood. She placed the resignation letter back into her bag and picked up the folder with the transfer documents. "Barcelona," she said slowly. "That's a long way from Manhattan." "Yes." Her voice softened slightly. "You're sure this is what you want?" The question felt sharper than any boardroom negotiation. "Yes," I said. She nodded once, decision settling into her posture. "Then I'll go." The word should have felt like a victory. The problem solved. The rumor buried under international logistics. Instead, something inside my chest tightened. Mara turned and walked toward the door of my office. Her hand rested on the handle for a moment before she looked back at me. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I hope this solves whatever problem you think I am." Then she left. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. For several seconds, I remained completely still. My office, normally a place of command and certainty, felt strangely hollow. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway. And that was when the realization arrived, slow and brutal. Sending Mara Quinn across the ocean hadn't removed the problem. It had only made the silence louder. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the empty doorway she had just walked through. And for the first time since I became CEO of this company, I felt something dangerously close to regret. But the real twist arrived 10 minutes later. My phone lit up with an email from HR. Subject: additional evidence. Quinn complaint attached was a message forwarded anonymously to the board. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. Because the person accusing Mara Quinn of manipulating executive leadership was claiming she had been involved in a secret relationship with me for years. The email accusing Mara Quinn of having a secret relationship with me stayed open on my screen long after the office lights dimmed for the night. It was written carefully, too carefully. The kind of language that tried to sound concerned while quietly poisoning everything it touched. It implied favoritism. It suggested manipulation. And woven beneath the corporate phrasing was something far uglier. The kind of bias that didn't need to say the word to mean it. I had spent years building a company where decisions were supposed to come from logic. But logic had never faced something like this. The next morning, the executive floor felt different. Not louder, not chaotic, just emptier. Mara moved through the hallway carrying a small stack of folders. Preparing transition reports for the Barcelona office, like the relocation, was nothing more than a change of scenery. Her movements remained precise, her expression composed, but I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. The way coworkers lingered near her desk a little longer, the way people spoke softer when she passed. News traveled fast inside corporate towers. The rumor had started moving. I stepped out of my office just as she finished speaking with one of the junior analysts. "Do you have a minute?" I asked. She nodded and followed me inside. When the door closed, the air between us felt different than it had before the accusation surfaced. More cautious, less certain. HR forwarded the complaint to the board, I said. She didn't look surprised. That was fast. You expected it. Mara leaned slightly against the chair. I expected the person who filed it to want an audience. Her calmness irritated me more than panic would have. "You're aware the email claims we've been involved for years," I said. "I saw it. You're not concerned." She looked at me then, her expression steady, but carrying something heavier underneath. "I'm concerned about the same thing I was concerned about yesterday," she replied. "Not the lie. The people who want it to be true." I studied her carefully. "You think this is about race?" Her answer came quietly. "I think some people in this building have always been uncomfortable with where I sit." The words weren't bitter, just factual. That made them harder to dismiss. For a moment, the room stayed silent. Then she straightened. "My relocation paperwork is finalized," she said. "Barcelona confirmed my arrival date. You're moving quickly." Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're the one who told me efficiency matters." She turned to leave, but paused before reaching the door. "You know," she added, glancing back over her shoulder, "distance doesn't actually stop rumors." The door closed behind her before I could respond. Over the next few days, the transition moved forward faster than I expected. Mara coordinated everything with her usual precision, training her replacement, organizing international logistics, preparing operational plans for the Barcelona office. Watching her dismantle her presence from the executive floor felt strangely unsettling. Every morning, fewer reminders of her remained. The early briefing summaries stopped arriving exactly 5 minutes before my first meeting. The coffee that always appeared on my desk before sunrise vanished. Even the calendar adjustments, small changes that used to happen invisibly, began arriving late or not at all. I tried to compensate by burying myself in work. New expansion proposals, investor calls, aggressive timelines. But the building felt colder, more mechanical. One afternoon, I overheard 2 senior managers speaking outside the conference room. "I still don't understand why Quinn is leaving," one said quietly. "The Barcelona promotion?" The other replied. That the first man laughed softly. You really believe that? Their voices lowered as they walked away. I didn't follow them. Instead, I returned to my office and stared out at the Manhattan skyline, realizing something uncomfortable. The company still functioned without Mara Quinn, but it no longer flowed. Her absence had disrupted something subtle, something structural I had never acknowledged before. On her final day, the office held a farewell gathering in the break lounge. I didn't attend. I stayed in my office reviewing quarterly reports that refused to stay in focus. Every time laughter drifted down the hallway, something in my chest tightened in a way that made concentration impossible. By the time the building emptied that evening, the floor had gone completely silent. I stepped out of my office and walked slowly toward the reception area. Mara's desk was already cleared. No files, no laptop, no coffee mug. The chair sat perfectly aligned with the desk, like she had erased herself from the space with surgical precision. For 4 years, that desk had been the quiet center of the executive floor. Now it looked like it had never belonged to anyone. I stood there longer than I meant to. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the company travel coordinator. Subject, Barcelona flight confirmation. Mara Quinn. I opened it automatically. Departure, a JFK International Airport, 9:45 p.m. Gate, A17. Estimated arrival Barcelona. Tomorrow morning. The time stamp said her flight was boarding in less than 20 minutes. I imagined her walking through the airport alone, carrying the same calm expression she wore in the office. No dramatic goodbyes. No emotional scene. Just quiet efficiency. Exactly the way she had always done everything. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and turned toward my office. This was what I had wanted. Distance, clean separation, control restored. But as I sat behind my desk, staring at the empty hallway outside my office door, something uncomfortable began to surface. Sending Mara Quinn across the ocean hadn't removed the feeling I was trying to silence. It had sharpened it, made it louder, more undeniable. I leaned back slowly in my chair, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And then my phone vibrated again, a new email notification from the board. Subject, emergency review, Quinn relocation. I opened the message. Inside was a forwarded thread between 2 board members. One sentence froze my blood. Once she's overseas, the investigation will be easier. Distance makes people disposable. My eyes moved back to the flight confirmation on my screen. Boarding time. JFK Airport. Mara Quinn was already on her way there. And for the first time since approving the transfer, a terrifying realization crashed through my mind. I hadn't protected her by sending her away. I had delivered her exactly where they wanted her. I didn't leave the office that night. The message from the board replayed in my mind long after the city outside my window fell into its usual midnight glow. Manhattan never truly slept, but the executive floor of Wexler Cade Technologies did. The silence stretched across the hallway like an abandoned stage. Distance makes people disposable. The sentence sat on my screen like a threat carved in stone. For the first time since becoming CEO, I realized something deeply unsettling. I had underestimated the cruelty of the people sitting beside me at the board table. They weren't just uncomfortable with Mara Quinn. They were preparing to erase her. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, but sleep never came. Instead, memories surfaced one after another, refusing to stay buried. 4 years of them. The first time Mara had corrected a scheduling mistake that would have cost the company a multi-million-dollar investor meeting. The night she stayed in the office until 3 in the morning during a cybersecurity crisis, calmly coordinating between departments while executives panicked. And the moment that had quietly changed everything without me realizing it. It had been during a disastrous negotiation with a venture partner who believed intimidation was a business strategy. The man had spent half the meeting questioning whether I was capable of leading a company this large. When the meeting ended, my temper had been dangerously close to slipping. Mara had been waiting outside the conference room with a stack of documents. "You handled that better than he expected," she said calmly. "That wasn't a compliment," I replied. Her expression didn't change. "No," she said. "But it was still true." She had always spoken to me that way, honest, measured, never trying to flatter or soften reality. And I had come to rely on it more than I realized. The realization hit me slowly as I stared into the empty hallway outside my office. My feelings for Mara Quinn hadn't appeared suddenly. They had been growing quietly for years. Every long night in the office, every crisis we survived together, every moment where her calm steadiness balanced my relentless drive. And I had responded the only way I knew how, but pushing her away. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city. Somewhere across the Atlantic Ocean, Mara was already on a plane heading toward Barcelona, toward a future I had decided for her. The idea was supposed to solve everything, protect the company, silence the rumors, restore order. Instead, it felt like I had amputated something essential from my life. I returned to my desk and opened the board's email again. Distance makes people disposable. The meaning behind the sentence was no longer subtle. Once Mara was overseas, the investigation would begin. The anonymous accusations would multiply, and she would be alone, thousands of miles away from the only person who could challenge the narrative they were building. Me. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Then 2. Then 3. By morning, I had reached a conclusion I didn't want. Logic said I should stay exactly where I was. A CEO chasing an employee across the Atlantic would look reckless, emotional, weak. But logic had also told me sending her away would solve the problem. And that decision had already proven wrong. At 6:15 a.m., my phone vibrated. A notification from the airline. Flight arrival confirmation, Mara Quinn, Barcelona, El Prat Airport. Landed. The message should have felt like closure. Instead, it felt like something slipping beyond my reach. For several seconds, I stared at the screen. Then something inside me shifted. A kind of clarity that doesn't arrive through reasoning. It arrives through realization. Distance wouldn't erase what I felt. And more importantly, distance wouldn't stop what the board intended to do. I grabbed my jacket and walked out of the office. My assistant, Daniel, looked up in surprise as I passed his desk. "You're early," he said. "I'm canceling today's meetings." He blinked them? Yes. He hesitated. "Should I reschedule them for tomorrow?" "No." Daniel frowned slightly. "Are you traveling?" The question hung in the air for a moment. "Yes," I said finally. "Business trip?" I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped into the elevator and pressed the lobby button. By the time the car reached the ground floor, the decision was already made. The drive to JFK Airport felt strangely quiet. No conference calls, no strategy briefings. Just the sound of the highway and the weight of a choice I never imagined making. At the airport terminal, I approached the airline counter. The attendant smiled politely. "Good morning, sir. Where are you flying today?" The answer came out before I had time to question it. Barcelona. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. "The next available flight leaves in 45 minutes. "That works." She glanced up at me. "Business or first class?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. "Whatever gets me on that plane." Minutes later, I walked through the terminal holding a boarding pass with a destination I had personally assigned to someone else less than 24 hours earlier. Barcelona. The place I had sent Mara Quinn to disappear from my life. And now I was following her there. As the plane lifted off the runway, New York shrinking beneath the clouds, a strange realization settled over me. For years, my life had been built on control, predictable outcomes, strategic decisions, calculated risks. But this was something entirely different. I stared out the airplane window at the endless Atlantic Ocean stretching beneath the wings. Because somewhere between approving Mara's transfer and boarding this flight, I had crossed a line I had spent my entire life avoiding. The line between control and vulnerability. And I had no idea what would be waiting for me when the plane finally landed in Barcelona. But one thought refused to leave my mind. What if I wasn't the only one who had followed Mara Quinn across the ocean? Barcelona looked nothing like Manhattan from the sky. As the plane descended through the morning clouds, the city unfolded beneath me in warm colors, terracotta rooftops, narrow streets, sunlight reflecting off the Mediterranean like liquid glass. It felt slower, less aggressive, and nothing like the steel grid of New York that had shaped the rhythm of my entire life. Manhattan was a place built on urgency. Barcelona felt like a place that refused to rush for anyone. The moment I stepped outside the airport, the difference became even clearer. The air carried the scent of salt and distant traffic, but there was something else too, an ease I wasn't used to. People walked without looking at their watches every 10 seconds. Conversations happened without the tension of closing deals. For the first time in years, I was somewhere my reputation didn't arrive before me. No one here cared that I was Adrian Grant, CEO of Wexler Cade Technologies. To them, I was just another man pulling a suitcase through a crowded terminal. The realization felt strangely unsettling. Control had always been my advantage. Here, it meant almost nothing. I checked into a hotel 10 minutes away from the Barcelona office, a quiet building facing a narrow street lined with small cafes. The receptionist greeted me warmly, speaking English with a soft Spanish accent. Business or vacation? She asked while scanning my passport. The question caught me off guard. For most of my life, the answer would have been automatic. Business, I said. But the word didn't feel entirely true anymore. Once inside my room, I set my suitcase down and walked to the window. The street below moved at an unhurried pace, people laughing at outdoor tables, cyclists passing slowly, sunlight spilling across the pavement like it had nowhere else to be. It felt like another planet compared to the executive floor of my company. And somewhere in this city, Mara Quinn was already building the international office I had sent her here to lead. I told myself I would wait until tomorrow to visit. That would be the logical move. Let her settle in. Observe the situation carefully. But logic had already failed me once. By mid-afternoon, I found myself standing across the street from the Barcelona office building. The structure was smaller than our Manhattan headquarters, but carried the same sleek design, glass panels, modern steel, the company logo mounted above the entrance. Through the windows, I could see employees moving between desks. And near the center of the room, Mara. She stood beside a conference table speaking to a group of staff members, a tablet in her hand, explaining something with the calm authority I had seen countless times before. But there was something different about her posture now. She wasn't assisting. She was leading. The team around her listened carefully, taking notes while she outlined the operational structure of the new branch. Watching her from across the street created a strange feeling in my chest. For years, I had thought of Mara as the person who kept my world organized. But standing here, seeing her command an entirely new office without hesitation, something became painfully clear. She had never needed my structure to succeed. She had simply chosen to work inside it. I stayed there longer than I intended, observing quietly. At one point, a young employee approached Mara with a question. The man spoke quickly, his tone uncertain, and I noticed the subtle tension in his posture. Mara listened without interrupting. Then she responded calmly, pointing to something on his laptop screen. Within seconds, the tension disappeared. The employee nodded, visibly relieved, before returning to his desk. The interaction lasted less than a minute, but it carried something I recognized immediately. Trust. The same trust she had built with my entire executive team in New York, except now it belonged entirely to her. I felt something shift inside me then, not jealousy, not regret. Something closer to admiration. For years, I had believed I was protecting Mara by controlling the environment around her. But watching her now made me realize something uncomfortable. She had never needed protection. She had needed opportunity. And I had almost taken that away from her by letting the board's prejudice dictate my decisions. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a message from Daniel in New York. Board meeting scheduled, an urgent discussion regarding Barcelona office. I stared at the notification for several seconds before locking the screen again. They were already moving. That, which meant my time here wasn't just about confronting my feelings anymore. It was about protecting Mara from the same people who had tried to push her out in the first place. The realization tightened something in my chest, because now there were two truths I couldn't ignore. First, the board wasn't finished with her. A second, I hadn't flown across the Atlantic just to watch from a distance. I crossed the street slowly, my reflection briefly appearing in the glass windows of the building. Inside, the Barcelona team continued working, unaware of who was about to walk through their door. I pushed the entrance open and stepped into the reception area. The sound of conversation in the office softened slightly as several employees looked up. And then Mara turned. For a moment, she didn't react. Her eyes locked onto mine across the room, the confusion flashing across her face like she was trying to decide whether I was actually standing there, because the last person Mara Quinn expected to see in the Barcelona office was the man who had sent her here to disappear. For a moment, the entire Barcelona office felt frozen. Mara Quinn stood across the room, a tablet still in her hand. Her eyes locked onto mine like she was trying to confirm whether I was actually standing there or if exhaustion had finally started playing tricks on her. Around us, the team slowly returned to their work, though I could still feel the curiosity in the air. The CEO of their company had just walked in without warning. That kind of entrance never went unnoticed. Mara recovered first. She turned to the group she had been briefing moments earlier. "Give me 10 minutes," she said calmly. "Continue reviewing the onboarding schedule." Her voice carried the same quiet authority I remembered from New York. But when she walked toward me, there was something else beneath the calm. Confusion, suspicion, and something dangerously close to frustration. She stopped a few feet away. "You're in Barcelona?" she said. The statement sounded less like surprise and more like a challenge. "Yes." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You sent me here 3 days ago." "I remember, and now you're here too. That's usually how travel works." Her expression didn't soften. "That wasn't humor," she said. "That was avoidance." I exhaled slowly. "You're not wrong." She gestured toward a hallway leading to a small glass conference room. "We should talk somewhere that doesn't involve half the office pretending they're not watching." Inside the conference room, the door closed with a quiet click. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Mara leaned against the table, studying me carefully. "You didn't announce a visit," she said. "You didn't notify the international office. You didn't even tell Daniel in New York why you canceled your meetings." The precision of her information didn't surprise me. "You spoke to him? He called me this morning," she replied. "He assumed you were already here on business. And what did you tell him?" "That I had no idea why my CEO disappeared across the Atlantic." Her gaze sharpened slightly. "So I'll ask again," she said quietly. "Why are you here?" I had prepared an answer during the flight. A clean one. Corporate language. Strategic reasoning. "I'm reviewing the international branch," I said. "The Barcelona office is the company's most important expansion this year." Mara watched me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Interesting. What is?" "The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company flies to Spain unannounced to review an office that opened 48 hours ago." Her tone wasn't hostile, but it was dangerously perceptive. "You're observant," I said. "That's been my job for 4 years." Silence stretched between us again. Something about this conversation felt different from the ones we used to have in Manhattan. Back there had always been a clear structure between us. Employer, employee, authority. Now that structure felt weaker. Maybe because this wasn't my territory anymore. Or maybe because the distance from New York had stripped away some of the barriers we used to hide behind. Mara studied me for another few seconds before speaking again. "You look different," she said. That caught me off guard. "Different how?" "Less certain." I almost laughed. Most people wouldn't say that about me. I'm not most people. That was true. She walked toward the window of the conference room, glancing down at the office floor, where employees move between desks. "They like working here," she said quietly. "The team is strong. The environment is healthier than New York." "That's good." She turned back toward me. "But that's not why you're here." I felt the familiar instinct to retreat behind professionalism. But something in her voice made that harder than usual. "You built this office quickly," I said instead. "Faster than the board expected." That's what happens when someone is trusted to lead. The sentence carried a subtle weight. Not accusation. Just truth. I always trusted your ability, I said, professionally. The word landed between us like a quiet challenge. She stepped closer to the table. You know what confused me about the transfer? She continued. What? The timing. Her eyes held mine steadily. 4 years of working beside you. 4 years of loyalty to this company. She paused briefly. And suddenly I'm relocated across the world. Someone accuses me of manipulating you. The tension in the room thickened. That wasn't coincidence, she said. I didn't answer. Because she was right. Mara's voice softened slightly. You didn't send me here because of the company. The silence stretched longer this time, and you didn't fly across the Atlantic to inspect office furniture. She added. I looked down briefly, then back at her. She was waiting. Not angry, not defensive, just waiting for the truth. Something inside my chest tightened as I realized how long I had been avoiding this moment. For years, I had hidden behind authority, behind business decisions, behind the illusion that logic could control every emotion. But standing here in Barcelona, thousands of miles from the boardrooms and expectations of New York, that illusion felt weaker. Mara watched me carefully. You're not the kind of man who acts without a reason, she said quietly. Everyone has a breaking point. And this is yours. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked at the office through the glass wall of the conference room. Her office. Her team. Her future. Then I turned back to her. You deserve to know the truth, I said finally. Her posture stiffened slightly. What truth? I took a slow breath. Because once the words left my mouth, there would be no retreat. No professional explanation, I said quietly. No corporate strategy. Mara's eyes narrowed slightly. Then why did you come to Barcelona? For years, I have been able to control every answer in every room, but this one was different. Because the truth had nothing to do with business, and everything to do with the one thing I had spent my entire life avoiding. I looked directly at her and realized that the real reason I had crossed an ocean could not stay hidden any longer. Mara didn't speak after I told her the truth. For a moment, the conference room felt unnaturally quiet, the low hum of computers outside the glass walls, the only reminder that the world hadn't stopped moving. I had finally said it, not with dramatic words or rehearsed confessions, just the truth I had avoided for years. I didn't come here for the office, I told her quietly. I came because sending you away didn't fix anything. Mara watched me carefully, her expression unreadable. You sent me here to solve a problem, she said. Yes. And now you've crossed an ocean because the solution didn't work. Yes. Her gaze held mine for several seconds. That's not a small omission for someone like you, someone like me. She meant the man who built his life around control. The man who rarely allowed emotions to dictate decisions. You built an entire company around discipline, she continued. People expect you to be rational. I usually am. Usually. Her voice carried a hint of irony, but it wasn't cruel. Just honest. I leaned back slightly against the conference table, running a hand across my jaw as the weight of everything settled between us. For years, I said slowly, I believed leadership required distance. You don't get attached to people who work for you. You don't blur lines that make authority complicated. That's not an unreasonable philosophy. No, I admitted. But it becomes a problem when the person you're trying not to get attached to becomes the one person you trust more than anyone else in the building. Mara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked toward the window again, looking down at the Barcelona office floor where employees were working under her direction. You trusted me professionally, she said. That's not all. Her shoulders tensed slightly. You're my CEO, she said carefully. Or at least you were when we worked in New York. That's exactly the problem. She turned slowly to face me again. What does that mean? It means that everything between us was buried under hierarchy. The words hung in the air. For the first time since we met, the roles that defined our relationship were being stripped away piece by piece. I spent years convincing myself that whatever I felt wasn't real. I continued. That it was just proximity. Long hours, shared pressure. And now. No, I know it wasn't temporary. Mara studied my face, searching for hesitation. She didn't find any. You understand what you're saying could destroy your reputation, she said quietly. I'm aware. You're the CEO of a company with a board that already suspects something inappropriate happened. I know. You think crossing the Atlantic to confess feelings for a former subordinate is going to help that situation. A small, humorless smile touched my mouth. No. It's probably going to make it worse. The room fell silent again. Mara folded her arms slowly, thinking. I've spent the last 3 days building this office, she said finally, trying to prove to the board, and to myself, that I belong here because of my work. You do. But if the rumors are true, she continued, then everything I accomplish becomes questionable. Her voice wasn't angry, just painfully realistic. That's the system we work inside, she said. I nodded. Which is why the system has to change. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. What does that mean? I've been thinking about it since I read the board's messages, I said. The investigation they're planning, the narrative they want to build. Mara's gaze sharpened. You saw their emails. Yes. And you still came here. Yes, she studied me again, more carefully this time. What are you planning, Adrian? The question lingered between us. Because the truth was bigger than a personal confession. It was a structural shift. I'm restructuring the company, I said. Her expression tightened slightly. You can't just restructure an entire corporation because of... I can, I interrupted calmly. And I will. I stepped closer to the table, resting my hands on its surface. The Barcelona office will become a fully independent international division, I explained. You won't report directly to me anymore. You'll lead the global operations branch with its own authority. Mara blinked once. That's a massive change. Yes. And the board. They won't like it. That's an understatement. I know. She stared at me for several seconds, processing the implications. You're willing to reorganize the entire leadership structure to eliminate the conflict between us? Yes. And what happens after that? She asked quietly. The question was simple. But the answer carried everything. After that, I said, whatever happens between us is no longer a violation of corporate hierarchy. The room went silent again. For the first time since this conversation began, Mara looked genuinely shaken, not frightened, just surprised. You would risk your position for this, she said. I already have. Her voice softened slightly. You don't do impulsive things. No. So this isn't impulse. No. It was something much more dangerous. Clarity. Mara looked down at the floor briefly, then back at me. When you sent me to Barcelona, she said slowly, I thought it was your way of protecting the company. It was, and now I'm protecting something else. The tension between us thickened. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Amara stepped closer to the table, her eyes searching mine with a kind of careful curiosity. You've changed, she said quietly. I'm trying to. Her lips curved slightly, though the emotion behind it was complicated. You realize what happens next, don't you? Yes. The board will fight you. I expect them to. They'll accuse you of exactly what they already suspect. I know. And if you lose that fight, her sentence trailed off. I finished it for her. I lose everything I built. Mara held my gaze steadily. And you're willing to take that risk? The answer felt strangely calm. Yes. For years, I had made decisions based on calculations. Profit, strategy, control. But this decision had nothing to do with any of those things. Because some choices weren't about winning. They were about refusing to lose the one thing that mattered. Mara exhaled slowly, processing everything I had just said. And then she asked the one question that mattered most. What are you going to do now? I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because the next step wasn't quiet. It wasn't private. And it certainly wasn't safe. If I'm going to do this, I said slowly, I can't hide it. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What does that mean? It means the board finds out the truth. Mara's voice dropped. You're going to tell them? Yes. She stared at me, stunned. Because the one thing Adrian Grant had never done in his entire career was publicly risk everything for another person. And now I was about to walk into the most powerful room in my company, and do exactly that. The board meeting happened 48 hours later. Not in Manhattan, but through a video conference that connected a polished boardroom in New York to a quiet glass office in Barcelona where I sat alone, the Mediterranean visible through the window behind me. It was the first time in my career that I had deliberately placed an ocean between myself and the people trying to control my decisions. Their faces appeared one by one on the screen. Carter Hale was the last. His expression carried the same polite arrogance I had seen countless times before, but there was something sharper behind his eyes now. Suspicion. Calculation. "Adrian," Carter said, leaning back in his chair. "We didn't expect you to relocate to Spain so suddenly." "I didn't relocate," I replied calmly. "I came to finalize a structural change." Several board members exchanged glances. "Structural change?" Another director asked. "Yes." I slid a document forward on the desk in front of me and activated the screen share. The new organizational chart appeared across their monitors. At the top of the international division sat a name they all recognized. Mara Quinn, President, Global Operations. The silence that followed was immediate. Carter's smile disappeared. "You're promoting her." "No," I corrected calmly. "I'm recognizing the role she's already performing." Another board member leaned forward. "Adrian, that the investigation regarding her conduct hasn't concluded." "That investigation is based on an anonymous accusation," I said. "One that conveniently appeared the moment we expanded internationally." Carter's voice hardened slightly. "You're dismissing a board concern." "I'm dismissing prejudice disguised as policy." The room went still. I had never spoken to the board that directly before. Carter folded his hands together slowly. "This isn't just about policy," he said. "There are questions regarding your professional boundaries." There it was. The accusation they had been preparing since the beginning. I leaned slightly closer to the camera. "You're referring to the rumor that Mara Quinn manipulated her proximate executive leadership." Carter didn't blink. "That's one way of describing it." "Interesting," I said quietly. "Because the only manipulation I've seen is coming from people who believed she didn't belong in this company to begin with." A few of the other board members shifted uncomfortably. They knew exactly what I meant. Racism inside corporations rarely arrived as open hostility. It arrived through quiet assumptions, through anonymous complaints, through subtle attempts to remove people who didn't match the image some executives believed leadership should look like. Carter's voice grew colder. "You're being emotional, Adrian." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm being honest." The silence stretched again. Finally, another director spoke fully. "Even if the accusations are unfounded," she said, "your decision to elevate Mins. The Quinn, while these questions exist, will raise concerns about your judgment." "Then let me remove those concerns." Carter's eyebrows lifted slightly. "How?" I looked directly in the camera. "Be clarifying something." Every face on the screen focused on me. "For 4 years," I said slowly, "Mara Quinn worked directly under my leadership." "That's correct," Carter replied. "And during those 4 years, our relationship remained strictly professional." Another pause. "But," I continued, "that is no longer the case." The reaction was immediate. Several board members leaned forward. Carter's voice sharpened. "Adrian, that..." "I'm not finished." The room went quiet again. "The international restructuring ensures that Mara Quinn no longer reports to me directly," I explained. "She leads a fully independent global division with its own governance structure." "And," Carter asked, "and now that those professional boundaries have been permanently separated," I took a slow breath. "What exists between Mara Quinn and me is personal." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had experienced in a boardroom. Because for the first time in my career, I had chosen truth over strategy. Carter stared at the screen, stunned. "You're confirming the rumors." "No," I corrected calmly. "I'm confirming the future." The distinction mattered. The accusation had claimed manipulation. But this moment was something else entirely. Choice. Another director spoke carefully. "You understand this could damage your credibility as CEO. I understand that leadership built on fear of perception isn't leadership." The boardroom fell quiet again. Finally, The director who had spoken earlier nodded slowly. The restructuring removes the ethical conflict. Yes, and is. Quinn's record speaks for itself. It does. Carter leaned back in his chair, clearly furious but unable to argue the structure I had just implemented, because legally and professionally, the conflict was gone. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. No vote. No immediate resolution. But something had shifted. For the first time, the board understood that the narrative they had tried to control no longer belonged to them. When the screen finally went dark, I exhaled slowly. The office door opened quietly behind me. Mara stepped inside. "You told them," she said. "Yes." Her eyes searched my face carefully. "And I'm still CEO." A faint smile appeared on her lips. "That's usually considered good news." "It is." She walked toward the window, looking out at the Barcelona skyline glowing under the afternoon sun. "You really did it?" she said softly. "I told you I would." For a moment we stood there in comfortable silence. Then she turned back toward me. "You know," she said, "3 weeks ago you sent me across the world to forget about me. That plan didn't work." "No," she agreed. "It didn't." I walked closer to the window beside her. The city stretched toward the sea, bright and alive in a way Manhattan rarely allowed itself to be. "You built something incredible here," I said. I shook my head slightly. "You did." Mara studied me for a moment. "You've changed. Probably. Less controlled." "Definitely." Her smile widened slightly. "And somehow a better CEO because of it." That part surprised me. "Why?" "Because people trust leaders who understand people," she said. "Not just systems." For years I had believed the opposite. That emotions weakened authority. That distance preserved clarity. But standing here in Barcelona beside the woman I had once tried to push out of my life, the truth felt undeniable. Leadership wasn't about isolation. It was about knowing what actually mattered. Mara glanced toward me again. "So what happens now?" I thought about the company, the board. The international division growing faster than anyone expected. Then I thought about the decision that had started everything. Sending her away, trying to erase something that refused to disappear. I smiled slightly. "Now," I said, "we stop pretending distance solves everything." She laughed softly. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a problem to manage. It felt like something worth building. Because the man who once transferred his secretary across the world to escape his feelings had finally learned the truth. Sometimes distance doesn't erase the heart. Sometimes it only reveals exactly where it belongs.